The morning sun slowly rose behind the mountain ridge, pouring golden light over the valley below. The air was crisp, fresh, and filled with the soft sound of rustling pine trees. A man stood on the porch of his small wooden cabin, a cup of steaming coffee in his hand. His home sat near the edge of a clear lake, its reflection like glass, surrounded by tall evergreens and the quiet beauty of nature. The cabin wasn't fancy. It wasn't modern, and it definitely didn't match the shiny suburban houses built nearby. But it was his. He had built it with his own hands, every plank, every stone carefully placed, every nail hammered by the sweat of years of work. The walls told stories of cold winters and warm fires, of peace that city life could never offer. It was home, the kind that didn't need approval from anyone. But peace in the mountains doesn't last when pride lives below. As he stood there enjoying the silence, he heard the distant hum of an engine growing louder. He turned slightly, his calm eyes narrowing as a black SUV rolled up the dirt road, its glossy body cutting through the natural beauty like oil in water. The vehicle stopped in front of his gate, and 3 people stepped out, each holding clipboards, wearing stiff smiles and expensive clothes. HOA board members. Their leader, a woman in her late 50s with sharp makeup and eyes that never smiled, adjusted her sunglasses before speaking. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying a false sweetness that sounded like poison wrapped in sugar. The man said nothing, just nodded slightly, taking another sip of his coffee. "We received complaints," she continued, walking closer to the gate as her heels sank into the gravel. "About your property. It seems your cabin violates several community standards." He raised an eyebrow. "Violates?" "Yes," she said firmly, pulling a paper from her clipboard. "Non-standard construction. Unapproved exterior design. Visual disturbance to neighboring properties." One of the other board members, a man with a smug grin, added, "It looks unprofessional. Doesn't match the character of the area." The woman looked at the cabin like it was dirt. "Frankly, it's an eyesore. A pile of wood pretending to be a home." Her words cut the quiet morning like a knife. The man didn't flinch. He just stared at them, calm, unreadable. "It's my property," he said evenly. "And I built it myself." She gave a fake laugh. "Yes, we can tell." The other 2 chuckled. The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew cold, sharp like the edge of a blade. "I followed every code. Every permit's on file," he said quietly. "Then maybe the city made a mistake," she replied, handing him the paper. "This is your first violation. You have 14 days to make modifications or face penalties." He took the notice slowly, his hand steady. "Penalties," he repeated, almost as if testing the word. "For building my home." "For lowering the community's value," she said without hesitation. "We have standards here, Mr. Walker. And your shack doesn't meet them." "Cabin," he corrected softly. She smiled tightly. "Trash by any other name is still trash." The other board members laughed again. One of them whispered, "Can't believe the city even approved this." The man said nothing. He folded the notice carefully and slipped it into his back pocket. The woman smirked, satisfied with the silence she mistook for defeat. "We'll check back in 2 weeks," she said sharply. "Hopefully, by then, you'll make some improvements. If not," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Her tone carried the threat clearly enough. The 3 turned and walked back to their SUV, still chuckling. As the engine roared and the tires kicked up dust, the man watched them disappear down the road. The wind blew softly through the trees, carrying the faint echo of their laughter. He stood there quietly, staring at the road long after they were gone. Then he looked at his cabin, the dark cedar walls, the stone chimney, the porch he built with his father's old tools. He ran his fingers along the wooden railing, feeling the roughness of it, the life in it. "Trash," he whispered to himself. "That's what they see." He finished his coffee slowly, his face calm, but something in his eyes shifted, a deep, quiet storm beginning to form. Later that day, he walked down to the lake, the reflection of the sky rippling in the water. He could see the neighborhood across the hill, The same people who thought nature was a backdrop for their glass mansions. They didn't understand what it meant to build something real, something made with hands, not money. He remembered when the HOA first came to power years ago. They promised order, beauty, and value. But what they really built was control. Rules about paint colors, fence height, even mailbox design. People followed, too afraid to fight back. But he wasn't like them. He'd lived through harder fights, tougher systems, and learned that silence was stronger than shouting. As the sun began to set, the mountains turned gold and the lake burned orange with reflection. He sat on the porch again, the violation notice beside him, reading every line carefully. Non-standard construction. Visual disturbance. His lips twitched in a small smile. If only you knew who you were disturbing. Inside, his cabin was neat and quiet. The fireplace crackled softly, the smell of pine and smoke filling the air. On one wall hung a framed photo, him standing beside a massive truck, shaking hands with a city mayor. The logo on the truck read Walker Waste Solutions. His old company. The largest environmental management and recycling firm in the state. He sold it years ago, but he never let go of the connections. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the picture for a long time. Trash, he murmured again, smiling faintly now. They called my home trash. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small notepad. The first page was blank, but the second page had something scribbled on it. A list of names. He took a pen and wrote 3 more beneath it. Mrs. Aldridge, HOA President, Mr. Carter, Treasurer, Mrs. Lane, Compliance Officer. He underlined the names slowly. You think trash is beneath you, he whispered. Let's see how it feels when it's on your doorstep. That night, the mountain air grew cold. The moon hung low and pale over the lake. The man stood outside once more, looking at his cabin glowing softly from the inside. A home that felt alive, defiant. Somewhere far below, the HOA president's mansion sparkled with artificial lights, standing proud and hollow. He smiled to himself. You don't understand what you're touching, he had told her earlier. Now, as the wind whistled through the trees, it felt like the mountains themselves whispered it back. They don't. He turned off the porch light and stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. The sound of the lock clicking was quiet, but it echoed like a promise. The next few days started with silence but ended with chaos. The man woke up early each morning, working around his cabin as usual, fixing the wood railing, chopping logs, and fishing in the lake. But peace didn't last. It never did when the HOA was involved. The first letter arrived on Monday. It was taped to his gate, printed in bold red letters, immediate action required. He opened it and read through the lines, his calm eyes scanning every word carefully. Failure to comply with HOA design standards will result in escalating penalties. He chuckled softly and folded it into his pocket, not saying a word. On Tuesday, another notice arrived. This one claimed his gravel driveway was an unapproved surface material. He had used the same gravel for years, long before any HOA existed. But logic didn't matter to people like them. They wanted control. They wanted obedience. And he gave them neither. On Wednesday, he saw the black SUV again. It parked right across from his gate, and 3 board members stepped out like vultures. The president, Mrs. Aldridge, stood with her clipboard in hand, eyes scanning every inch of his property like a hunter searching for prey. Mr. Walker, she called out with that fake polite tone. I see you haven't addressed our concerns. The man stood on his porch, arms folded, calm as still water. I've read your notices, he said, but I've broken no laws. She smiled thinly. You've broken our rules, and in this community, that's the same thing. This isn't your community, he said quietly. This land has been mine for 20 years. I was here before your HOA even existed. One of the board members laughed mockingly. Then maybe it's time for an upgrade. The president tilted her head, smirking. We have standards, Mr. Walker. This isn't a campground. His eyes flickered for a moment, the calm in them turning colder. No, he said softly, This is nature. You just forgot what it looks like. She didn't like that answer. You'll regret your attitude, she said sharply. Defiance doesn't end well here. He didn't reply. He simply turned and went back inside, closing the cabin door behind him. Through the small window, he watched her frown, muttering something to her team before they left. By the weekend, the harassment became a pattern. Every 2 days, another letter. Every 3 days, another inspection. The HOA even sent someone with a drone to take aerial photos of his roof. He caught it buzzing above the cabin one evening and calmly aimed his hose at it, blasting it out of the air with a powerful stream of water. It crashed into the lake with a satisfying splash. The next morning, he received an email accusing him of vandalizing HOA property. He laughed out loud this time. Vandalizing, he muttered, shaking his head. You're the ones trespassing. But while he appeared calm, inside he was watching, planning, and collecting everything. Every letter went into a folder marked evidence. Every photo, every date, every recording of their threats. He wasn't just ignoring them. He was building a case. He knew how power worked because he used to wield it himself. That night, sitting by the fire, he opened his old leather notebook. It contained sketches, business cards, and handwritten contacts, city officials, inspectors, contractors. Some of them still owed him favors. He ran his finger down one page and stopped at a name, Graham Waste Logistics. A small grin touched his lips. That was one of the companies he had once built. You called my cabin trash, he whispered. Maybe it's time you learned what trash really is. Over the next few days, he began making calls. Quietly, discreetly. A few companies owed him favors. A few still used his old systems. He didn't mention the HOA, he just asked questions about routes, contracts, waste zones, and who handled the HOA's garbage pickups. When he found out that Mrs. Aldridge's own property was serviced by a private waste company under her name, his plan began to form in perfect silence. Meanwhile, the HOA pushed harder. They sent landscapers to inspect soil health on his property. When he stopped them at the gate, one of them said nervously, "We were told to take samples." He shook his head. "Not from my land." The worker hesitated, then left. But that night, he saw the same truck parked near the road, its headlights off, 2 people inside watching his cabin from afar. He didn't confront them. He just noted the license plate and took a photo. The next morning, he mailed a report to the county sheriff's office for illegal surveillance. Let the HOA think they were the hunters. He was already building their trap. The tension grew thicker in the neighborhood. People whispered about the constant fights, some defending the HOA, others secretly supporting him. A few neighbors even stopped by, offering quiet words of encouragement. "They've gone too far this time," one old man said. "You should sue them." "No," the man replied calmly. "I don't need to sue them. I just need to wait." As the days passed, the HOA's confidence grew while their ignorance deepened. They believed he was weak, a stubborn old builder refusing to bend. But they didn't see the quiet smile every time they drove away, the calm before a storm they couldn't predict. One evening, Mrs. Aldridge hosted a community event at her mansion. Expensive cars filled her driveway, laughter echoed through the air, and she bragged about finally getting rid of that eyesore cabin soon. What she didn't know was that miles away, on a computer in his cabin, the man had already rerouted a few waste management systems in her area. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even direct. Just a few accidental adjustments in the delivery schedules, all signed under her own name. The system was old, one he had built years ago, and he still had the access keys. When he finished, he sat back in his chair, the glow of the fire reflecting in his eyes. "You called my home trash," he whispered. "Let's see how you like living in it." The next morning, as she opened her door, the HOA president froze. A huge garbage container sat in her driveway, filled to the top with broken furniture, food waste, and black trash bags. The stench was unbearable. She covered her nose, furious. "What is this?" she shouted. But there was no one around. She stormed inside, dialing her assistant. "Who authorized this?" she demanded. The assistant said nervously, "It's under your account. We got an email from you last week requesting additional waste bins." "What email?" she snapped. "I never," but before she could finish, she heard another engine outside. Another truck arrived, this one filled with even more containers. The driver looked confused but checked his tablet. "Says right here, 10 cubic yards of disposal for property cleanup. Address matches." "Turn it around," she screamed. The man just shrugged. "Sorry, can't. Paid in full." Then he drove off, leaving the container in her yard. That night, while her house reeked of trash, the man sat by his fire, sipping coffee and watching the moonlight on the lake. The phone on his table buzzed with another email confirmation. Delivery complete. He smiled faintly and whispered, "That's only the beginning." For the next few days, the quiet mountain air carried something new, the faint, sour smell of garbage. It started small, almost unnoticeable at first, just one misplaced dumpster, one confused driver, one complaint that didn't make sense. But soon, it grew. The HOA president's mansion, once spotless and perfectly trimmed, became surrounded by chaos. Dumpsters appeared out of nowhere, parked right in front of her gate like soldiers in a line. Each one was labeled with her name and signature. She called every number she could, shouting at customer service, demanding an explanation. Our system shows these were ordered directly by you," one representative explained. "We even have your digital authorization." "I didn't order any of this," she screamed, her voice shaking with fury. The rep said calmly, "We also have an invoice from your HOA email address, confirmed last week." Her hands trembled as she hung up. Outside, her driveway was buried under the smell of rotten food, plastic, and mold. Every time she thought it was handled, another truck arrived, unloading more trash. She tried blocking the road, but city trucks kept coming. She called the city, and they said they had nothing to do with it. She called the HOA office, but the staff had started to question her leadership. "Maybe it's a glitch," one of them said nervously. "Or maybe someone's sending a message," another whispered. Her face went pale. A message? From who? She thought of only one name, Walker. She clenched her fists. "That man," she hissed. "He's behind this." But she couldn't prove it. Not a single email, document, or trace linked back to him. Meanwhile, in his small cabin by the lake, the man sat quietly by his desk, his old laptop glowing softly in the dark. He scrolled through a control panel from a private network he had built years ago. His fingers moved slowly, confidently. A few more rerouted requests here, a few automatic renewals there, and the entire neighborhood's waste schedule turned upside down. He didn't hack anything. He didn't break any law. He simply used the system better than the people who thought they ran it. He leaned back, sipping his coffee as he watched the digital map blink red in all the HOA zones. "You called my home trash," he whispered. "Now you'll live surrounded by it." The next morning, chaos erupted across the community. The smell of garbage filled the air. Streets that were once spotless now had trash bins overflowing. Rats appeared for the first time in years. HOA members panicked, running around in confusion, calling every department they could. Residents shouted at them, furious. "We pay dues for this?" One man yelled at Mrs. Aldridge as she stood outside her mansion, sweating and red-faced. "What are you people even doing?" "We're handling it," she snapped, trying to stay composed. But she wasn't. Her eyes were wild, her hair a mess, her patience gone. That evening, the local news van arrived, recording the bizarre sight of a luxury community drowning in trash. Cameras caught Mrs. Aldridge shouting at workers, waving papers, blaming everyone but herself. The man watched it all from his cabin, the flickering firelight dancing on his face as the news anchor said, "Officials are unsure how the error began, but residents report the HOA president may have mistakenly approved mass waste deliveries." He smiled faintly. "Mistakenly," he murmured. "That's one word for it." The next day, he decided to make it worse. He contacted an old friend who still worked for one of the city's contractors. Over the phone, his tone was casual, friendly. "Hey, I heard you've got a mess up in Willow Creek," he said. His friend groaned. "Don't remind me. The whole area's garbage routing system went haywire." "Yeah," the man said calmly, "I can help. But maybe keep the extra bins near the HOA president's mansion a little longer. For verification purposes." The friend laughed. "Verification? Hey? Sure thing. Always good to be thorough." "Always," the man said quietly before hanging up. By the next morning, the president's mansion looked like a landfill. Piles of garbage stretched across her lawn, blocking her gate completely. The smell was unbearable. The once proud woman, who had lectured everyone about standards and beauty, was now the center of the ugliest sight in the entire county. Her neighbors avoided her street. Some even started calling her house the dump. She tried everything: private cleaning services, police complaints, city officials. But every call ended the same way: "You'll need to resolve this with the company listed on the invoice." And every invoice had her name. Inside her office, she sat at her desk, shaking, staring at the pile of unpaid bills. Each stamped delivered under authorization. "Aldridge, Karen." She slammed her hand down. "That man's doing this," she screamed. "I know it's him." Her assistant looked terrified. "But how? He hasn't broken any laws." "He's mocking me," she whispered. "He's ruining me." That night, while she screamed into phones, demanding answers, the man sat outside his cabin under the stars, listening to the sounds of the forest. The air smelled like pine and rain. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, calm and quiet. He didn't take pleasure in revenge for its own sake. He believed in balance. The HOA had taken his peace. Now, they would understand what it felt like to lose theirs. In the distance, he could see faint lights glowing from the town below. He knew Mrs. Aldridge's mansion was somewhere in that glow, now buried under her own hypocrisy. He poured himself another cup of coffee and leaned back, smiling faintly. "Funny thing about trash," he said softly, watching the fire crackle. "It always finds its way home." The next morning, the HOA held an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. The place stank because even their office had trash bins piled outside. Board members shouted over each other, desperate for a solution. "We're becoming a joke," one shouted. "The city thinks we're incompetent," another yelled. Mrs. Aldridge slammed her fist on the table. "It's not my fault," she barked. "Someone's sabotaging us." "Who?" another asked. "The man with the cabin? He doesn't even come to meetings." "He's smarter than you think," she muttered bitterly. "He's not stupid enough to leave a trail." "Then prove it," someone challenged. "If you can't, maybe you should step down." The room went silent. She glared around, breathing heavily. For the first time, her control was slipping. Her reputation, her authority, her pride, all rotting away faster than the trash on her lawn. That night, as the storm rolled in over the mountains, the man sat by his window, watching the lightning flash across the lake. His cabin glowed warmly inside, a small fortress of calm in the chaos below. He whispered to himself, "They wanted to play dirty. They just forgot I know the dirt better than anyone." He turned off the light, the storm rumbling outside, and smiled one last time before sleep. The revenge had just begun, and the smell of it was only getting stronger. The next morning, the sun rose over Willow Creek, but instead of peace, it brought the smell of rotting garbage and the sound of shouting. The once perfect HOA neighborhood, known for its clean streets and shiny lawns, now looked like a disaster zone. Dumpsters lined the roads, trash bags overflowed from driveways, and stray dogs rummaged through piles of waste. People stepped outside holding their noses, waving uselessly at the smell that wouldn't go away. And right in the middle of it all stood Mrs. Aldridge, the proud HOA president, her perfect hair undone, her fancy robe stained, her patience gone. She yelled orders to her staff, waving her clipboard like a weapon. "Clean it up. Call the city again. Get rid of this mess." But her voice cracked with desperation. The city had already told her that every bin, Every container, every pile of trash had been ordered under her own HOA account. There was nothing they could do. Her assistant said nervously. We've called every company in town. They all say the same thing. The requests are confirmed and paid from the HOA's funds. She turned sharply. Impossible. I didn't approve that. Then who did? The assistant whispered. Mrs. Aldridge looked around the street, her eyes cold and suspicious. She spotted the man sitting on his porch across the hill, his cabin glowing softly in the morning light. He sat there calmly, sipping coffee, watching her like someone watching a movie he already knew the ending to. Their eyes met for a second. She froze. He smiled faintly, tipped his mug in a small greeting, and then looked away. Her stomach twisted. It's him, she said through clenched teeth. I know it's him. But her assistant said quietly, there's no proof. That was the worst part. There was no trail. Every document, every authorization, every digital signature pointed back to her. The man had been careful. Too careful. She had nothing but anger and humiliation. By afternoon, the entire community turned against her. Homeowners gathered in the clubhouse, yelling and demanding answers. The air smelled like rot and frustration. Our lawns are covered in garbage, one man shouted. My kid got sick from the smell, another woman cried. You promised this place would be clean. It's being handled. Mrs. Aldridge snapped, slamming her hand on the table. We're working with the city to— No, you're not, someone interrupted. I called the city. They said it's your fault. It's not my fault, she screamed, losing control. Then whose is it? A resident shouted. You're the one who runs everything around here. Her eyes darted around, desperate for control she no longer had. We are victims of sabotage, she declared loudly, her voice trembling. Someone's doing this on purpose to ruin me. I mean, to ruin us. The crowd erupted into chaos. People laughed, some booed, others shouted questions she couldn't answer. One man stood up and said, maybe you should resign. You've turned this neighborhood into a dump. The room fell silent. Her face went red. How dare you? But before she could finish, the doors opened, and a local news crew walked in, cameras rolling. The reporter said, the entire town's talking about Willow Creek. What do you have to say about being labeled the dirtiest neighborhood in the county? She froze, her throat dry. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered. This is temporary. Temporary? The reporter pressed. Residents say it's been over a week. And records show your HOA personally authorized multiple waste deliveries. I didn't, she shouted. It's a setup. By who? The reporter asked, holding the mic closer. By someone who wants to destroy this community. Her voice cracked, desperate. Behind her, the man's neighbor, an older woman, whispered to the reporter. She's been harassing that man with the cabin for months. Maybe this is karma. The reporter smiled slightly. Interesting. Mrs. Aldridge's heart pounded as the cameras flashed. She shoved the mic away. This interview is over, she shouted. Get out. She stormed out of the room, humiliated, the crowd watching her in silence. Later that evening, she drove home, her face pale, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. As she turned into her driveway, her eyes widened in horror. 3 new dumpsters sat there, overflowing with trash. Spray-painted across one in big red letters were the words "Trash is beauty." She jumped out of her car, trembling with rage. That man, she whispered. He's mocking me. She grabbed her phone and called the HOA treasurer, Mr. Carter. You need to come here now, she hissed. He's taunting me. Mrs. Aldridge, he said tiredly, please. I've had garbage trucks outside my house all day. The board's in chaos. We can't even access the funds anymore because of the pending investigations. What investigations? She shouted. City auditors, he said. Apparently, someone filed a complaint about HOA misuse of funds. Who? She demanded. Who would? But she stopped herself mid-sentence. The realization hit like ice water. She turned slowly toward the mountain, where the cabin lights twinkled faintly in the dark. "Walker," she whispered. "He did this." That night, a storm rolled over the valley. Thunder cracked, rain poured, and lightning flashed across the lake. The man sat by his fire, calm as ever, his old laptop open on the table. On the screen were multiple email confirmations, route changes, delivery reports, and inspection notices, every one of them perfectly legal, all approved under HOA authorization. He wasn't breaking the law. He was simply letting their own arrogance destroy them. "You built your house on control," he said softly to himself, watching the flames dance. "Now watch it collapse." By morning, the news had exploded statewide. HOA president accused of mismanagement after garbage disaster. Her name was everywhere. Reporters waited outside her mansion as she tried to sneak out, shouting questions she couldn't answer. Residents began removing their HOA signs, painting over the neighborhood's symbol of authority. The man sat outside his cabin again, drinking coffee, watching the mess from afar. For the first time, the mountain air smelled clean again. From his porch, he could see her standing in front of her mansion, yelling into her phone, waving her arms like a cornered animal. He said quietly, "You called my home trash. Now you live in it." He stood up, stretched, and walked inside, his calm footsteps echoing through the cabin. Behind him, thunder rolled again. As if nature itself approved. The next few days felt like the slow collapse of a kingdom. The once proud HOA that had ruled Willow Creek like royalty was now falling apart piece by piece. The garbage still filled the streets, the smell still hung heavy in the air, and every day brought another headline, another embarrassment, another angry homeowner demanding answers. Mrs. Aldridge barely slept. Her phone never stopped ringing, reporters camped outside her mansion, and she couldn't even step out without someone shouting, "Hey, President, when are you cleaning this dump?" Her once flawless reputation had turned to dust. The city had officially frozen the HOA's accounts while auditors investigated unauthorized spending. Even worse, someone had leaked internal emails showing that she had personally ordered the waste deliveries. The board members turned against her immediately. "You ruined everything," one yelled during a meeting. "You spent our funds on trash." "I didn't," she screamed back, her voice breaking. "It's not me. Someone forged those emails." "Who?" another demanded. "Walker." "Yes," she snapped. "That man's behind this. He's always hated the HOA." "Then prove it," someone said coldly. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. She couldn't. There was nothing left but rumors and desperation. That evening, the HOA called an emergency meeting open to all residents. The hall was packed, people standing shoulder to shoulder, angry, tired, and fed up. At the front of the room sat Mrs. Aldridge and the remaining board members, pale and nervous. She stood, clearing her throat, trying to sound like the leader she used to be. "Everyone," she began shakily, "please remain calm. We are resolving this issue. You said that last week," someone shouted. "My street smells like a landfill," another yelled. "Your house is the reason the rats came." The crowd laughed bitterly. "Please," she said, raising her hands. "We have identified the person responsible for all of this chaos." The crowd went silent for a second. "Who?" someone asked. She took a deep breath. "Walker," she said firmly. "The man with the cabin. He's been manipulating the system to humiliate this community. He's behind everything." The room buzzed. Some people looked surprised, others doubtful. At the back of the room, the man himself walked in, calm as ever. Every head turned as his boots echoed against the wooden floor. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He just walked straight down the aisle, eyes fixed on Mrs. Aldridge. She stiffened when she saw him. "You shouldn't be here," she said coldly. "You're not a member anymore." "No," he said quietly, "but you are." The crowd murmured. He reached the front, took out a folder, and placed it on the table in front of her. "You've accused me of destroying your community," he said calmly, his voice steady and low, "so let's show them who really did." She frowned, confused. What is this? He opened the folder and began sliding documents across the table. Printed emails, transaction receipts, invoices, each one stamped and verified. These, he said, are copies of every waste order made in the past month. Each one routed through your HOA's internal system. Each one approved under your login credentials. Her face drained of color. That's fake, she stammered. I don't know how you— It's not fake, he interrupted gently. Because it came from your own email address. The same one you used to find me for my cabin's non-standard design. You used to call me trash, remember? The room fell completely silent. People leaned forward, whispering. How did you get these? She demanded. He smiled faintly. Let's just say I know your system better than you do. You see, Mrs. Aldridge, I built the waste management network this county still uses today. The same one your HOA's billing system connects to. You thought you could control me with your rules. But you've been living inside my system the whole time. The room erupted into gasps. One of the board members stood, his face red with shock. Is this true? You built another stammered. The man nodded calmly. Years ago. I designed it, ran it, and then sold it. But I kept one thing, access. He leaned slightly closer to Mrs. Aldridge. So when you called my home trash, I thought maybe you should experience what that really means. Every dumpster, every delivery, every truck that showed up outside your mansion, all processed under your own authority. Legally. She stared at him, shaking, speechless. You destroyed this community, she shouted suddenly. You embarrassed me. No, he said softly. You did that yourself. All I did was show everyone what happens when garbage tries to rule over gold. The crowd broke into murmurs again, some angry, some amazed. A man from the back shouted, He's right. You fined us for small things, humiliated people for years, and now look at you. Others started clapping. The noise grew louder and louder. She ruined this place, someone yelled. Step down, another voice cried. Resign. Resign. The chant echoed through the hall, the sound building like thunder. Mrs. Aldridge's eyes filled with tears. You can't do this, she cried. I built this community. The man looked at her, his expression calm but firm. No, he said quietly. You buried it under rules and pride. I just cleaned it up. The room fell silent again, heavy and final. One of the board members stood slowly. Effective immediately, he said, voice trembling. I motion to remove Mrs. Aldridge from her position as HOA president. Another member quickly seconded the motion. The crowd burst into applause. She looked around wildly, shaking her head, shouting, No, no, you can't, but it was over. The man turned away as the vote carried unanimously. Her reign had ended. As he walked toward the exit, reporters rushed toward him, flashing cameras in his face. Sir, is it true you orchestrated the waste deliveries? One asked. He paused at the door, looking back. I didn't orchestrate anything, he said calmly. I just let the trash take itself where it belonged. And with that, he stepped outside, into the cool mountain air. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in gold and crimson. The smell of garbage was still faint in the distance, but it was fading, replaced by the scent of pine and rain. He walked down the dirt path toward his cabin, hearing the faint echoes of cheering behind him. When he reached his porch, he sat down with his coffee, just as he had that first morning. Peace had finally returned. But this time, it came with victory. He looked across the lake at the hill where Mrs. Aldridge's mansion stood, dark, silent, and surrounded by the mess she once created. You wanted control, he whispered. Now you have none. He leaned back in his chair, the quiet of the forest wrapping around him again. The fireflies flickering in the growing darkness. His cabin glowed warm and alive, proof that real beauty doesn't need permission, it just needs patience. And as the night settled over the valley, the man closed his eyes with a faint smile. They called it trash, he murmured. But I built it to last. A week passed after the meeting that changed everything. The HOA was officially dissolved by the city, its board members under investigation, and its proud president, Mrs. Aldridge, was left with nothing but her ruined reputation and the smell of garbage that still haunted her home. News channels kept replaying clips of the public humiliation, her shouting, the crowd chanting for her resignation, and the man's calm words that silenced the entire hall. Across the mountain, life at the cabin returned to peace. The man woke up early each morning, brewed his coffee, and watched the mist rise from the lake. The air was clean again, free of noise, free of rules, free of arrogance. But his revenge wasn't finished. Not yet. He wasn't a man of anger. He was a man of closure. And closure meant balance. That morning, he opened his laptop and read an email from the county office. The city was putting the former HOA clubhouse and surrounding lots up for auction. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same land that once fined him for existing was now begging for a new owner. He smiled faintly. Perfect, he whispered. Within hours, he had placed his bid, quiet, discreet, and in cash. He didn't even need to use his real name. The sale closed 3 days later. The HOA's old office, the one filled with rules, fines, and arrogance, now belonged to him. The next morning, when Mrs. Aldridge drove by, hoping to pick up her last belongings, she froze in the street. The sign outside the building no longer said Willow Creek HOA Administration. Instead, it said Walker Environmental Restoration Project. She slammed her car door and stormed toward the entrance, heels clicking against the pavement. Inside, the once proud meeting room had been stripped bare. The banners, the awards, the framed rules, all gone. The man stood there, arms folded, calm as ever, overseeing workers repainting the walls. She stopped in the doorway, shaking. You, she spat. You bought it. He nodded slowly. I did. Why? She demanded. To humiliate me more? Haven't you done enough? He looked at her quietly. No, he said softly. To fix what you broke. You ruined me, she snapped. You destroyed everything I built. No, he replied, his voice calm and cold. You destroyed yourself. I just watched. She glared at him, trembling. You think you're better than us because you live alone in a shack. It's not a shack, he said evenly. It's a home. Something you'll never understand because you care more about appearances than peace. Her face twisted with anger, but there was no fire left behind it. The world had already seen who she truly was. You won't get away with this, she hissed. You embarrassed me publicly. No, he said, turning toward the window. I reminded people what real beauty is, and it's not your rules or your marble floors. It's honesty. She stood there silently, breathing heavily, her pride crumbling like dry wood. You called my cabin trash, he continued quietly, but the city saw it differently. Did you know they registered it last week? She frowned. Registered? As a heritage property, he said, turning to face her fully. Protected under environmental preservation. They called it a model of sustainable living. Her mouth fell open. You're lying. He smiled faintly. Check the papers. She fumbled with her phone, searching desperately. The article was there, local cabin recognized for eco-design, owner honored for environmental contribution. Her hands shook as she read her own words from years ago, quoted by the journalist. Mr. Walker's property did not meet HOA aesthetic standards. The irony was too sharp to swallow. They called it trash, he said softly, and now the city calls it treasure. She looked at him, tears forming in her eyes, not from sadness, but from rage and humiliation. You can't, I already did, he interrupted, his tone final. The land you mocked is now protected. The office you ruled from now belongs to the man you tried to destroy. That's not revenge, Mrs. Aldridge. That's justice. She backed away slowly, speechless, before turning and running out the door. Outside, her car engine roared, the tires screeching as she drove away, her world collapsing behind her. The man stood by the window, watching her leave, then turned back to the workers. Leave that one wall untouched, he said, pointing to the corner where the HOA's mission statement had once hung. Why? One of them asked. He smiled faintly. Because people should remember what happens when rules become greed. A few days later, the building reopened under a new name, Willow Creek Restoration Center. It wasn't a place for fines or rules anymore. It was a community workshop, helping locals plant trees, build gardens, and restore the lake. The same residents who once feared the HOA now volunteered with pride. Even the kids who used to avoid the trashman's cabin came by to learn gardening and carpentry. And through it all, the man never bragged, never boasted, never reminded anyone of what he had done. He just worked quietly, rebuilding what arrogance had broken. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, he stood on the porch of his cabin, looking out at the lake. The reflection of his new office shimmered across the water, glowing with warm light. He could hear laughter in the distance, real laughter, not the forced smiles of HOA meetings. The neighborhood had changed. Peace had returned, not through control, but through understanding. A small smile crossed his face. You can't control beauty, he whispered. You can only grow it. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of pine and flowers from his garden. The same garden they once called ugly. He took a deep breath, the smell of the earth reminding him of the beginning. It had started with soil, with patience, with belief. And it ended with balance. Behind him, the sign of the restoration center glowed under the evening sky, from trash to treasure. He chuckled softly. That's fitting, he said. Then he picked up his coffee, sat on his porch, and watched the stars rise over the clean, quiet lake. His land, his peace restored at last. Months passed, and the once toxic neighborhood had turned into something new, something real. The HOA was gone, the rules erased, and peace had finally returned to the valley. Nature had reclaimed what arrogance once ruled. The man's cabin now stood as a symbol, not of rebellion, but of resilience. Every time someone passed the lake, they slowed down, staring at the small home that had changed everything. Word had spread far beyond Willow Creek. People from nearby towns came to see the eco-cabin that survived the HOA war and turned into a model of sustainable living. The man never asked for fame or attention. He kept to his routine, quiet as ever, tending to his garden, fixing things by hand, and watching the reflection of the mountains dance on the lake. But he noticed how people changed. They started planting trees again, painting fences together, helping each other instead of reporting one another. The fear that once ruled the community was gone. It had been replaced by something better, unity. One crisp autumn morning, he received an envelope in his mailbox. It wasn't a threat or a fine this time. It was a handwritten letter from the city. Inside was an official notice. The old HOA land had been fully transferred to his ownership as part of a restoration grant. At the bottom, there was a note from the mayor himself. Your project restored more than land. It restored people's faith in fairness. Thank you. The man folded the letter quietly, slipped it into his jacket, and walked to the lakeshore. The air was cold and clean. The trees had turned golden, and the lake shimmered like glass. He looked at the reflection of his cabin. Still the same, still strong, still his. Behind him, he heard footsteps crunching on the gravel. He turned slowly and saw Mrs. Aldridge standing there. She looked different, older, tired, and far from the proud woman she used to be. Her clothes were plain, her hair tied back, her eyes hollow. She held a small paper bag in her hands. I came to return this, she said softly, placing the bag on a nearby bench. It's your old HOA approval documents. I kept them. He looked at her quietly, saying nothing. You were right, she whispered. About everything. I let power blind me. I thought rules made people better. But all I did was destroy what was already beautiful. She looked around at the lake, the trees, the gardens blooming along the shore. You built something they'll remember, she said quietly. Something I never could. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't say I told you so. He simply nodded once. Everyone builds something, he said calmly. Some build walls. Others build bridges. She looked down, tears in her eyes. "I wish I could undo it." "You can't," he said gently. "But you can learn from it. That's how we start again." She looked at him one last time, then turned and walked away slowly, disappearing down the path. The man stood there for a long while, watching the ripples move across the lake. The world was quiet again, not empty, just peaceful. As he turned to head back toward his cabin, he stopped and looked at the sign standing near the trail. Willow Creek Restoration Center, founded on the idea that beauty belongs to everyone. He smiled faintly, touched the wood, and whispered, "That's how it should be." The day faded into evening, and golden light spilled across the water. Children's laughter echoed faintly from across the shore where volunteers worked on a new community garden. The same land that once punished people for breaking rules was now full of laughter and color. The man sat on his porch, sipping coffee, the fire crackling beside him. The sky turned pink, then orange, then deep blue. The first stars appeared, one by one, shining over the mountains. He leaned back, closing his eyes, remembering the day it all began. The insults, the fines, the humiliation. He had faced it all without shouting, without hate, and that was what broke them. Patience had always been his weapon, truth his shield. And now, justice was his peace. He opened his eyes again and looked at the reflection of the stars on the lake. In that quiet moment, he understood something deep. Revenge was never about destroying others. It was about restoring balance. "They called it trash," he murmured, smiling softly, "but it became treasure." The wind blew through the pines, carrying the scent of earth and rain. Somewhere far behind him, the ruins of the old HOA office still stood, half demolished, half forgotten, like a warning carved into history. But ahead of him, the valley glowed with life. The camera would slowly pull back now, showing the lake shining like silver under the moonlight. The cabin standing strong at its edge, surrounded by the very beauty they once tried to erase. And as the scene faded into darkness, the man's calm voice would echo one last time, "Power fades. Nature stays. And peace always finds its way home."